The young science of psychology developed from the more established fields of physiology and biology. Wundt as both philosopher and psychologist, James was an American philosopher. Freud was an Australian physician. Ivan Pavlov, who pioneered the study of learning, was a Russian psychologist. Jean Piaget was the last most influential observer of children. A Swiss biologist, these Magdalens of mind, as Mortar Hunt has called them, illustrated psychology's origins in many disciplines and many countries. Like those early pioneers today, psychologists are citizens of many lands. Their International Union of Psychology Science has 71 members nations. From Albania to Zimbabwe. In China, the first university psychology department began in 1978. By 2008, there were nearly 200. Moreover, thanks to international publications, joint meetings, and the internet, collaboration and communication now cross borders, psychology is growing in its globalizing. The story of psychology, the student of this book, continues to develop in many places at many levels, with interests ranging from the study of the nerve cell activity to the study of international conflicts. Across the world, psychologists are debating enduring issues, viewing behavior from the different perspectives offered by subfields in which they teach, work, and do research. Psychology's biggest question: are human traits present at birth? Do they develop through experience? Has this been psychology's biggest and most persistent issue? As we've seen, the debate over nature-nurture issue was ancient. The ancient Greeks debated this, with Plato assuming that we inherit character and intelligence, and that certain ideas are also inborn, and Aristotle countering that there is nothing in the mind that does not come first in the external world through the sense. In the 1600s, philosophers rekindled the debate. Locke rejected the notion of inborn ideas, suggested that the mind is a blank slate on which experience writes on. Descartes disagrees, believing that some ideas are infinite. Descartes' views gained support from a curious naturalist who centuries later, in 1831, an indifferent student but ardent collector of beetles, mollusks, and shells, set sail on historical round-the-world journey. The 22-year-old voyager Charles Darwin pondered the incredible species variation he encountered, including tortoises on one island that differed from those on the nearby islands. Darwin's 1859 On the Origin of Species explained this diversity by proposing the evolutionary process of natural selections. From among chance variations, nature selects traits that are best enable an organism to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. Darwin's principle of natural selection, what philosopher Daniel Dennett has called the single best idea anyone has ever had, is still with us 150 years plus later as biology's organizing principle. Evolution also has become an important principle for the 21st century psychology. This would surely have pleased Darwin, for his belief theory explained not only animal structures, such as polar bear's white coat, but also animal behaviors, such as the emotional expressions associated with human lust and rage. The nature-nurture issue recurs throughout this text, as today psychologists explore the relative contributions of biology and experience, asking, for example, how we humans are alike because of our common biology and evolutionary history, and diverse because of our differing environments, as our gender differences, biologically predisposed or socially constructed. Is children's grammar mostly innate or formed by force? How are the intelligence and personality differences influenced by heredity and by hereditary and by environment? Are sexual behaviors more pushed by inner biology or pulled by external incentives? Should we treat psychology disorders, depression, for an example, as the disorder of the brain or disorders of the thought, or both? Such debates continue, yet over and over again we will see that in complementary science, the nature-nurture tension dissolves. Nurture works on what nature endows. Our species is biologically endowed with enormous capacity to learn and adapt. Moreover, every psychological event, every thought, every emotion is simultaneously a biological event. Thus, depression can be both a brain disorder and a thought disorder. Psychology's 3 levels of analysis. Each of us is a complex system that is part of a larger social system. But each of us is also composed of smaller systems such as our nervous system and body organs, which are composed of still smaller systems, cells, molecules, and atoms. These triad systems suggest different levels of analysis, which offer complementary outlooks. It's like explaining why horrific school shootings have occurred. Is it because the shooters have brain disorders or genetic tendencies or that cause them to be violent? Because they've been rewarded for violent behavior? Because we in the United States live in a gun-promoting society that accepts violence. Such perspectives are complementary because everything is related to everything else. Together, different levels of analysis form an integrated biopsychosocial approach, which considers the influences of biological, psychological, and social cultural factors. Each level provides a valuable vantage point for looking at behaviors or mental processes, yet by each itself incompetent. Like different academic disciplines, psychology's varied approaches or perspectives ask different questions and have their own limits. One perspective may stress the biological or psychological or social cultural level more than the other, but the different perspectives described on the next page complement one another. Consider, for an example, how they should shed light on anger. Okay, there are different psychological approaches. We're going to start off with the first perspective, behavioral. It's how we learn to observe, how we learn observable responses. So this is a learned trait. How do we learn to fear particular objects or situations? What is the most effective way to alter our behavior, say, to lose weight? So in that case, we would start eating more healthy and start exercising more. Another approach is biological, how the body and the brain enables emotions, memories, and sensory experience, how the genes combine with the environment to influence individual differences. So, how do pain messages travel from the hand to the brain? If we burned our hand, how does that go to the brain? And how is the blood chemistry linked with the moods and motives? To what extent are traits such as intelligence, personality, sexual orientation, and depression attribute to our genes, to our environment. So how is the way we are made going to affect how we act? Say that someone puts their hand on a burner, their immediate reaction is to pull away. But say somebody does not have feeling in their hand. When they put their hand on their burner, they're not going to know that their hand is burning because the nerves aren't sending signals to the brain that, oh, my hand's hurting, because they don't know. Those nerves do not work. Okay, another perspective is cognitive. I don't know how to pronounce that, but cognitive. How we encode, process, store, and retrieve information. So how do we use information in remembering, like on tests, or for reasoning, like why we chose this decision instead of that decision. Solving problems, how we learn from the past, like what we remember from the past, how we know to omit CPR and when not to. And evolutionary, how the natural selection of traits has promoted the survival of genes. So, natural selection, how does evolution influence behavior tendencies? Like in a high school social environment, kids typically try their best to be that kid. So you won't see them doing embarrassing, what's considered embarrassing in front of their peers. Humanistic, how we meet our needs for love and acceptance and achieve self-fulfillment. So how do we work towards fulfilling our potential? How can we overcome barriers to our own personal growth? So this is when humanistic is when we show maturity. Psychodynamic, how behavior springs from unconscious drives and conflicts. How can someone's personality traits and disorders explain by unfulfilled wishes and childhood traumas? So say that somebody has a trauma from their childhood about someone being run over and they saw that. Do you think that they would be comfortable crossing streets? No. Social cultural, how behavior and thinking varies across situations and culture. How are we alike as members of one human family? How do we differ as products of our environment? So, how behavior and thinking vary across situations and cultures. So, in one culture, it is acceptable to tip a waiter, while in other cultures, they don't do that. That's not something that comes to mind. But in America, it's like a custom to do that. Or in America, women are treated equally, or we're trying to get that. We're not as put down as some other women who aren't in other countries, who aren't allowed to even go outside without a man. Okay? So, someone working for the behavioral perspective might attempt to determine which external stimuli triggers angry responses or aggressive acts. So, somebody punching you, your behavioral response is to fight back, maybe, or I don't know. Someone working from a biological perspective might study the brain circuits and cause us to be red in the face, and hot under the collar. How hereditary the experience or influence of individual temperates. So this is how our body reacts to our anger, and maybe it's because our parents have the gene for anger issues. Someone working from the cognitive perspective might study how our interpretation of stimulation affects our anger and how anger affects our thinking. So, this one is talking about how, like, a situation, we might be reminded about the situation, we might remember something, and how anger could affect our thinking. It's weird. Someone working from the evolutionary perspective might analyze how anger facilitated in the survival of our ancestors' genes. So, anger caused them to fight for this land, or how there's not that many Native Americans because they lost this land. That affected them. But the British and the Spaniards were able to gain this land because of their anger towards wanting this land. Someone from a humanistic perspective, a historical, important approach, might have been interested in understanding how angry feelings affect a person's potential for growth. As we will see, modern day positive psychology incorporates humanistic psychologies and emphasis on human flourishing. So, say that somebody did something to you when you were little kids, right? And later on you see them in your work environment when you're older. Are you going to act salty upon them? Are you going to still hold that grudge from something they did when they were little? Because if you do hold that grudge when you guys are like 40 or something, that shows immaturity. But if you forgive and forget about that, or let that grudge go, that will show that you are mature. You have had some personal growth. And someone working from a psychodynamic perspective might view an outburst as an outlet for the unconscious hostility. Say that, you know, when you're having one of those bad days where everything's just going wrong and you're just holding it all in, you're bottling it all up, and then something as simple as your pen falling from your desk makes you so upset that maybe you start crying and you just lose it. That's psychodynamic. When someone's working from a social cultural perspective, they might explore how expressions of anger vary across cultural contexts. Like, some places it's yelling because that's acceptable, and hitting is not violence is not accepted in some cultures. While in other cultures, violence is accepted, and the person might choose violence over yelling because they feel like their actions are greater from what they've seen from their social cultural area. Okay, psychology subfields. Picturing a chemist at work, you probably should envision a white-coated scientist surrounded by glassware and high-tech equipment. Picture a psychologist at work. You would be right to envision a white-coated scientist probing at a rat's brain. An intelligent researcher measuring how quickly an infant shows boredom by looking away from a familiar picture. An executive evaluating a new healthy lifestyle training programs for employees. Someone at a computer analyzing data on whether adopted teens' temperates more closely resemble of their adoptive parents or their biological parents. A therapist listening carefully to a client's depressed thoughts. A researcher visiting another culture and collecting data on variations in human values and behavior. A teacher or writer sharing the joy of psychology with others. Those are all different perspectives that we just talked about. So, The cluster of subfields we call psychology is a meeting ground for different disciplines. Psychology is a hub scientific discipline, said Association for Psychology Science President John Caprino in 2007. Thus, it's the perfect home for those with wide-ranging interest in diverse activities, from biological experimentation to cultural comparisons. The tribe of psychology is united by a common quest, describing and explaining behavior and the mind underlying it. There is even a branch of psychology devoted to studying the measurement of our abilities, attitude, traits. This is called psychometrics. Some psychologists conduct basic research that builds psychology's knowledge base in the pages that follow. We will meet a wide variety of such researchers, including biological psychologists exploring the links between the brain and the mind, developmental psychologists studying the changes in abilities from womb to tomb. That's funny. Cognitive psychologists experimenting with how we perceive, think, and solve problems. Educational psychologists studying the influences on teaching and learning. Personality psychologists investigating our persistent traits. Social psychology exploring how we view and affect one another. These and other psychologists also may have conducted applied research, tackling practical problems. Industrial organizations, for example, use psychology's concepts and methods in the workplace to help organizations and companies select and train employees, boost morale and productivity, design products, and implement systems. Within that domain, human factors psychologists focus on the interaction of people, machines, and physical environments. Although most psychology textbooks focus on psychology science, psychology is also helping profession devoted to such practical issues as to how to have a happy marriage, how to overcome anxiety or depression, how to raise thriving children. As science, psychology as its best bases such interventions on evidence and effectiveness. Counseling psychologists help people to cope with challenges and crises, including academic, vocational, and material issues, and to improve their personal and social functioning. Clinical psychologists assess and treat mental, emotional, behavior disorders. Both counseling and clinical psychologists administer and interrupt tests, provide counseling and therapy, and sometimes conduct basic and applied research. By contrast, psychiatrists, who also may provide psychotherapy, are medical doctors licensed to prescribe drugs and otherwise treat physical causes of psychological disorders. We will study the history of therapy, including the role of pioneering Dorothy Dix in the therapy unit, reforms such as Dix and Philip Beanall, led by the Way to Humane Treatment of Those with Psychological Disorders. The balanced historic psychologies focused on human problems. Martin Silgum and others have called for more research on human strengths and human flourishing. Their positive psychology scientifically explores positive emotions, positive character traits, and enabling in situations. What they ask: can psychology contribute to a good life that engages one's skills and meaning, fulfill life that point beyond oneself? Rather than seeking to change people to fit their environment, community psychologists work to create social and physical environments that are healthy for all. For example, if school bullying is a problem, some psychologists will seek to change bullies. Knowing that many students struggle with the transition from elementary to middle school, they might train individuals on how to cope. Community psychologists instead seek ways to adapt the school experience to early adolescent needs. To prevent bullying, they might show how the school, the neighborhood foster bullying, with perspectives ranging from biological to social, and with settings from the laboratory to the clinic. Psychology relates to many fields, as we see in Module 3. Psychologists teach in medical schools, law schools, and high schools, and they will work in hostile history, psychology, analysis of historical characters, psycholinguistics, the study of language and thinking, and the psychodynamics, the study of crackpots. That doesn't sound nice. Okay. Psychology also influences modern culture. Knowledge transforms us. Learning about the solar system and the germ theory of disease alters the way people think and act. Learning about psychology's findings also changes people. They less often judge psychological disorders and moral failings. Treatable by punishment and ostracical, they less often regard and treat women as men's mental inferiors. They less often view and rear children as ignorant, willful beasts in need of taming in each case. Noted by Morton Hunt. Knowledge has modified attitudes and, through them, behavior. Once aware of psychology's well-researched ideas about how body and mind connect, how a child's mind grows, how we construct our perceptions, how we remember and misremember our experiences, how people across the world differ and are alike. Your mind may never be again quite the same. But bear the mind psychology limits. Don't expect it to answer the ultimate questions, such as those posed by Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. Why should I live? Why should I do anything? Is there life any purpose? Does life have a purpose? Which the inevitable death that awaits me does not undo and destroy. Although many of life's significant questions are beyond psychology, some very important ones are illuminated by even the first psychology course. Through painstaking research, psychologists have gained insight into the brain and mind, dreams and memories, depression and joy. Even the unanswered questions can renew our sense of mystery about things too wonderful for us yet to understand. And you will see in modules 4 through 8, your study of psychology can help teach you how to ask and answer important questions, how to think critically and evaluate competing ideas and claims. Psychology deepens our appreciation for how we humans perceive, think, feel, and act. By doing so, it can indeed enrich our lives and enlarge our vision. Throughout this book, I hope to help guide you towards that end. As an educator, Charles Eliot said a century ago, books are the quietest and most constant of friends, and the most patient of teachers.